minute. Minute.
Okay. Is that better? Ha ha. I'm gone for a week, and this should come as no surprise that I've got my technology all messed up. So, thank you, Druid, my dear. So I've missed you guys. Oh my gosh, sitting down today to get all hooked up and everything, I was like, oh my god, it feels like I've been gone a month. Um, so I appreciate your patience last week while I was away. Not won't get into the details, but it was it's a family situation. My dad is very sick, and probably gonna have some more rescheduled slash canceled streams for a little bit. And then April is a lot of travel, so we're gonna see how things go. Worst case, I will come up with an alternate schedule because honestly, I miss you guys. I need this. This keeps me organized. So, but on a lighter note, a week away did give me a bunch of time to work on some things. And I actually had a plan to do this deep dive with you guys today in the art world. And I kind of pooped out. Hey, Robin. So I sort of pooped out on the presentation because it's art. So, like, there's things for you to see. So, hey, Quiltish. So yeah, I pooped out on that. I'm hoping to get that to you on Thursday because I had a really, really fun time doing this deep, crazy dive into some 20th century art and Marcel Duchamp specifically. I learned some stuff about Marcel Duchamp that I just never knew. Things I probably had like seen in passing, but since I was in art school, I'd always kind of knew a few things about him, which I thought were cool. But I did this deep dive and I'm like, he's a really interesting cat. So, planning for that on Thursday, fingers crossed. One thing I will say about it is I will actually have to put the adult warning on the stream that day. Because Marcel Duchamp was kind of a dirty old man. Not really, but a lot more of his work centered on, I guess, sexuality, like sexual topics. So, it's interesting. Very, very interesting. So anyway, I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys. But in the meantime, today will be a bunch of reading because, yeah, that's kind of all I got together. I did do some deep dives into our community slash cult. And I kind of have some AI updates. I'll give you guys those quickly in a minute. But I have to say, Babraham, in my absence, Babraham has been trying to do some wardrobe adjustments. And I'm sorry, this little 1930s doll romper is not going to work for you, Babraham. You guys might remember this little garment. A dear friend sent it to me. It's the cutest thing ever. Technically, it should fit him, but alas, his inseam to shoulder ratio is very odd. And I mean, I kind of feel his pain. All the times that onesie type outfits have been have been popular. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to fall to the fashion of the onesie. I remember when I was in college, like little romper type things were in, and then those have come back multiple times. The coveralls, I actually have a couple pairs of coveralls, and for the most part, they're loose enough. I can work with them. But if you've got like torso dimensions that just are not a perfect fit for ready-made garments, the onesies don't work. I don't know if you guys have ever had that problem, but I certainly have. And it's disappointing because sometimes like pantsuit, jumpsuit, coveralls, onesie, they're really, really cute. And you think about it, it's like you have to worry about your shirt staying tucked in, and it's like you don't have to worry about matching a top and a bottom. Robin. Amen maker, yes. Hello. Yeah, and that's what I was about to say. Like, you then realize, like, the first time you have to basically get naked in a public place to go to the bathroom. Worst case, like, a porta potty. curls can goose you. Yes. Oh my gosh, Ann Unmaker. Okay, you came to it early. You understood as a child. Yeah. So poor Abe, poor Abraham. He's feeling the same pain, and he's gonna have to like get rid of the onesie. So, but he's naked under here, so we can't take it off now. But we're really working on his personality and his backstory. So he's going to be a very interesting character in my performance art cult. So let's see what else. Big announcement for tomorrow on Quilt Nerding. If you guys watch or hang out, I think Jill made the announcement this past Tuesday while I was gone, but we will have Pam Weeks lecture, the paid lecture that we're going to host. We will have that available for purchase, I think, tomorrow. So that big announcement will come out. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be on my in my shop, the Slow Sewing shop, just because we have a shopping cart there and it's easy to manage all of the stuff, when it's when there's a setup mechanism for that, and we don't have to worry about some other forum for that. So keep an eye out for that. Jill is so good with social media. She will post it everywhere, even if I forget. So, but we're super excited about that. That's going to be coming up really soon. And I'm just super thrilled that we're going to have an opportunity to host it, and we'll see how it goes. And, going forward, if you yourself or somebody that is interested in teaching a topic online that we could help you with, we would love to do that. We sort of we're doing this as like a trial run to see how it goes, and we've got a couple of audiences that we market to, and we'll see how it goes. And I'm just excited about it, and I hope you guys will have the time and interest to attend. And if not, we understand that we've got also the free stuff that'll come along with our regular quilt nerding nights, and we'll be reading Pam's book, and we'll be doing an interview with her as well. So anyway, keep an eye out for that, and I think that's probably my big announcement. Excuse me. I do know that I am going to have, like I said, some out of town dates coming up that are planned, and knocking on wood, I don't have any more unplanned stuff for forever. I wish, but you guys know how these things go. So just keep an eye out. And if you were not aware, the Cake TV Facebook page is just a thing to keep an eye on, and I know a bunch of you do. But if you were not already aware of it, Jared, if you're able to, if you can just put the link to that in there. I didn't have it. I can grab it later if not, but if you have a chance, just drop it in there. For anybody who doesn't already follow that, that's kind of the helpful place where I can put, anything that's going on if if we have to cancel the stream or whatever. I posted that the other day. So that said, I think that's everything. There's probably a million things I'm forgetting to tell you, but that it's just a normal Monday. So because I sort of dropped the ball on what I was going to do, we're going to roll back onto things that I've had sitting around, which is always good. You're always good having a plan B and a backup. And thank you, Druid. I appreciate it. I always have extra things to read to you guys that I've had in the wings. So finally getting around to reading this How to Manage a Husband from the English Women's Domestic, what is it? The English Women's Domestic Magazine. Oh, this is terrible. I'm totally blanking. It's on my phone, actually. Let me look and make sure I have the right title for this. This was a English publication that Jill and I ran across when we were reading The Dress Diary, which is the thing that we're currently reading. And we came across this interesting publication. All right, where did you go? I probably closed it. Oh, here it is. There's copies of it on the hathitrust.org website, and it is called let me go to the main page for the catalog. It's the English Woman's Domestic Magazine. And I think, if I remember correctly, all of the dates correspond with Godey's. So at the same time Godey's Ladies Magazine was super popular in the US. The English Women's Domestic Magazine, also popular in the UK. And actually, it doesn't look like it was published for quite as long. I mean, Godey's went from 1830s to, 1890s. And a big chunk of it was, oh, thanks, Druid. I put the quilt learning in there. Awesome. A big chunk of Godey's was under the editorship of Sarah Josepha Hale, but it was in production before and after her. I don't know a whole lot about the history of the English Woman's Domestic Magazine, other than it's a fashion magazine. It's got the same kind of stories and women's stuff that you find in Godey's. So. But in some ways, it's funny. It's funnier than Godey's because it's got this British attitude. So, and this particular article, How to Manage a Husband, already seems like so ridiculous. And then, of course, we're still reading From Hoopskirts to Nudity by Carrie Hall. And I think we've decided that she's going to be an interesting read. I feel like this book is more interesting than her quilting book. But we'll see. I got through, I guess, halfway through the first chapter week before last, and so we'll finish that up and then see how far we can get in chapter 2. So that's the plan for today. Just making sure there isn't something like in the periphery that I'm going to remember like in 2 hours, and I'll be like, I have to wait till Thursday to tell you guys. All right, why don't we go ahead and read How to Manage a Husband. So this, let's see, this was from, oh my goodness. All right, let me look again which one this was from. I believe this one is from 1861, I think this one is. Need to do a better job of writing these things down. It's the same one that I've read out of before. On how to find a husband, which was the op-ed complaining about these odd letters this woman had found, and she doesn't identify herself, but she ranted about it, and those were pretty funny. But I feel like How to Manage a Husband is going to be even better for some reason. So whether you have a husband, if you've ever had a husband, if you know about husbands, I think that probably some things that might be helpful for us or that we can laugh at. So without further ado, from the English Women's Domestic Magazine, 1850 or 60 something, How to Manage a Husband. And this says, this tale is extracted from a pleasing little work from the pen of Mr. T.S. Arthur, and published by Messrs. Partridge and Oakey, entitled Married Life, Its Shadows and Sunshine. So now this is interesting because this is from the pen of Mr. T.S. Arthur. So a man wrote this? Or is it a woman working under a pen name? I don't know. We'll see. All right, How to Manage a Husband. To those who have never tried this experiment, the management of a husband may seem a very easy matter. I thought so once, but a few years' hard experience has compelled me to change my mind. When I married Mr. John Smith, which was about 10 years ago, I was not altogether blind to his faults and peculiarities. But then he had so many solid virtues that these were viewed as minor considerations. Besides, I flattered myself that it would be the easiest thing in the world to correct what was not exactly to my taste. Is that not the number one mistake women make in getting involved with a man who has some peculiarities? You mean like being a drunk, womanizing, stirring his coffee too loud? Oh my gosh, Drew, let's see. Timothy Shea Arthur. Okay, so he's a real person. Presumably not so popular 19th century American. Okay. He's famously known for his temperance novel, 10 Nights in a Barroom, and what I saw there. Okay. This is interesting. Helped demonize alcohol in the eyes of the American public. So yeah, that was kind of a big deal. Also co-author of dozens of stories for Godey's. Okay. So he's written for Godey's as well as this. Antebellum Era published and edited his own Arthur's Home magazine, so he obviously thinks he knows. He did so much to articulate and disseminate values, beliefs, and habits that define respectable, decorous middle class. This is interesting because I've already noticed some things that he said in here where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So this is kind of cool, I guess. We're learning about this period of time in an English magazine from an American writer who happens to be a man who's writing about women's concerns. Well, but he does make a point here. How many of us have gotten into a relationship thinking, I'll change him? Lots of people make that mistake, not just women. It is no matter of special wonder that I should have erred in this, for Mr. John Smith, while a lover, really appeared to have no will of his own and no thought of himself. It was only necessary for me to express a wish, and it was gratified. I soon found, much to my disappointment, that there is a marked difference between a husband and a lover. Yeah. So you buy the pretty thing and you realize once you open the packaging, you're like, oh, this was crap. It was at least so in the case of Mr. Smith. An observation, since I have had my eyes open, satisfies me that it is just so in most cases. I must own, in justice to all parties, however, that this difference is made more apparent by a want of knowledge on the other side in regard to the difference between the relations of a wife and a sweetheart, between the wooed and the won. There were a good many little things in Mr. Smith which I had noticed before marriage that I made up my mind to correct as soon as I had an opportunity to apply the proper means. This is too funny. What did yours say? Let's see. Oh, he was acquainted with Poe. Poe wrote in Graham's magazine that Arthur was uneducated and too fond of mere vulgarities to please a refined taste. This is so funny. He enjoyed great popularity but was not well regarded. Well, just keep going. See what he has to say. He had a fashion of saying Miss for Mrs., as Miss Jones and Miss Peters for Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Peters. This sounded exceedingly vulgar to my ears, and I waited almost impatiently for a time to come when I could use the prerogative of a wife for its correction. No kidding. Hey, Jen. Absolutely. I think this is probably the one thing I love the most about these, like, cadres of writers is they are very, very, I mean, they're very, I think they tend to not look in the mirror so much and they sling around these kind of criticisms, and they are probably for want of their own criticism. Because, I mean, Poe, come on, he was not exactly an arbiter of perfection, as we know. Like, he had like a lot of faults. So he had an ungraceful way of lounging in his chair and half reclining on the sofa, even in company, that was terrible. It made me uneasy from head to foot. Then he said, I shew it to him, for I showed it to him. Often for often, and obliged for obliged. So she doesn't like the way he pronounces things. Beside these, there were sundry other things that worried me not a little. But I consoled myself with the reflection that when I became Mrs. Smith, all of these little matters would vanish like frost in the sunshine. I was, alas, doomed to be mistaken. But let me give my experience for the benefit of those who are to come after me. We had just been married for 10 days. She's going to get started right away. And I had begun to feel that I was really a wife, and had a right to say and do as little as I pleased, when Mr. Smith said to me, as we sat quite lover-like on the sofa in the evening, I met Miss Williams when I came home this evening. For mercy's sake, Mr. Smith, I don't say miss when you speak of a married woman. It is excessively vulgar. I also like the fact that she calls him Mr. Smith, even though they're married. I was not aware that I had spoken in a very offensive way, but I noticed an instant change in Mr. Smith. He replied with some dignity of tone and manner. I ask your pardon, madam, but I didn't say miss. I am not quite so ignorant as all that comes to. Oh, yes, Mr. Smith, but you did say it, I replied, quite astonished at this unexpected denial. Well, my gosh, what do you expect, Mrs. Smith? Excuse me for saying that you were in error, he returned, drawing himself up. I never say Miss for Mrs. Why, Mr. Smith, you always say it. I have noticed it 100 times. I believe I can hear it pretty correctly. In this instance, you certainly have not. Mr. Smith was growing warm, and I felt the blood rushing to my face. A rather tart reply was on my lips, and I bit them hard and succeeded in keeping them closed. A deep silence followed. In a little while, Mr. Smith took up a newspaper and commenced reading it. And I found some relief for a heavy pressure that was upon my bosom in the employment of hemstitching a fine pocket handkerchief. And this was the return I had met for a kind attempt to correct a mistake of my husband's that made him liable to ridicule on the charge of vulgarity, and to deny, too, that he had said miss when I had been worried about it for more than a year. It was too bad. After this, Mr. Smith was very particular in saying, when he spoke of a married woman to me, Mrs. The emphasis on the second syllable was much too strongly marked for it to be pleasant to my ears. I was terribly afraid he would say mistress, thus going off into the opposite extreme of vulgarity. I mean, people do that today. Madam. This first attempt to put my husband straight had certainly not been a very pleasant one. He had shown unexpectedly to me a humor that could by no means be called amiable, and by which I was both grieved and astonished. I made up my mind that I would be very careful in future how I tried my hand at reforming him. But he oft repeated, he shew it to me, and obliged. Soon fretted me so sorely that I was forced to come down upon him again, which I did at a time when I felt more than usually annoyed. I cannot remember now precisely what I said to him, but I do know that I put him into an ill humor, and that it was cloudy weather in the house for a week, although the sun shone briefly enough out of doors. He shewed it to me, and obliged were, however, among the things that had been after that. So much was gained, although there were times when I half expected that I had lost more than I had gained. But I persevered, and every now and then, when worked up about something, administered the rod of correction. This poor woman. Gradually, I could see that my husband was changing, and I felt for the worst. He couldn't hear anything from me. From the thoughtful, ever-considerate, self-sacrificing lover, he had come to be disregardful of my wishes, careless of my comfort, and indifferent to my society. Still, I felt by no means inclined to give him up, was by no means disposed to let him have his own way. This disillusioned woman, my goodness. It was clear in my mind that I had rights as well as he had, and I possessed resolution enough to be ready to maintain them. His self-will and indifference to my wishes roused me to a bitter and contentious spirit, and in an evil hour I determined that I would make a struggle for the mastery. An opportunity was not long delayed. The Philharmonic Society had announced one of its splendid concerts. A lady friend who had frequently attended these concerts called in to see me. And by what she said filled me with the desire to enjoy the fine musical treat that had been announced for that very evening. When Mr. Smith came home to dinner, he said, before I had time to mention the concert, "Mary, I have taken a fancy to go and see Fanny Elsler tonight. And as there will be no chance of getting a good seat this afternoon, I took the precaution to secure tickets as I came home to dinner. I would have sent the porter with a note to know whether there was anything to prevent your going tonight, but he has been out all morning, and I concluded that even if there should be some slight impediment to this way, you could easily set it aside." Now this I thought too much. To go and buy tickets to see a Fanny Elsler dance, and take it for granted that I would lay everything aside to go, when I had set my heart on attending the Philharmonic concert. Well, You are a strange man, Mr. Smith, said I. You ought to know I don't care a fig about seeing Fanny Ellsler. I don't relish such kind of performances. You at least might have waited until you came home to dinner and asked the question. I don't believe a word about the good seats all being taken this morning. But it's just like you to go and see this dancer toss her feet about. Toss her feet about. Was the thing you made up in your mind to do, and I was to go with you whether I liked it or not. You talk in a rather strange way, Mrs. Smith, said my husband, evidently offended. I don't see that I do, I replied, warming. The fact is, Mr. Smith, you seem to take it for granted that I am nobody. Here, I have been making all my calculations to go to the Philharmonic tonight, and you come home with tickets for the theater. But I can tell you plainly that I am not going to see Fanny Ellsler, and I am going to see the Philharmonic. Uh-oh, Mary Smith. This was taking a stand I had never taken before. In boast of my efforts to make my husband go my way, he had succeeded in making me go his way. This always chafed me dreadfully. I fretted and scolded and all that sort of thing, but it was no use. I could not manage him. The direct issue of I won't and I will had not yet become made, and I was some time in coming to the resolution to have a struggle, fiercer than ever, for the ascendancy. I fondly believed that for peace sake he would not stand firm if he saw me resolute. Under this view of the case, I made the open averment that I would not go to the theater. I expected that a scene would follow, but I was mistaken. Mr. Smith did indeed open his eyes a little wider, but he said nothing. Just then the bell announced that dinner was on the table. Mr. Smith arose and led the way to the dinner room with a firm step. Before we were married, he wouldn't have dreamed of thus preceding me. I was fretted at this little act. It indicated too plainly what was in the man. Dinner passed in silence. I forced myself to eat that I might appear unconcerned. On rising from the table, Mr. Smith left the house without saying a word. You may suppose I didn't feel very comfortable during the afternoon. I had taken my stand, and my intention was to maintain it to the last. That Mr. Smith would yield, I had no doubt at first. But as evening approached and the trial time drew near, I had some misgivings. Mr. Smith came home early. Mary, said he, in his usual pleasant way, I have ordered a carriage to be here at 7:30. We mustn't leave home later, as the curtain rises at 8. What curtain rises? Where do you think of going? To see Fanny Ellsler, of course. I mentioned to you at dinner time that I had tickets. This was said very calmly. And I told you at dinner time that I was going to the Philharmonic and not to see this dancer. I tried to appear as composed as he was, but failed in the attempt altogether. You were aware that I had tickets for the theater before you said that, was the cold answer he made. Of course I was. This was in the one issue, and then you had to wait until the next issue to find out what happened. Very well, Mary. You can do as you like. The carriage will be here at 7:30. If you are then ready to go to the theater, I shall be happy to have your company. And my husband, after saying this with the most unruffled manner, politely bowed and retired to the parlor. I was on fire, but I had no thought of yielding. At 7:30, I was ready. I heard the carriage drive up to the door and the bell ring. Mary, my husband called out at the bottom of the staircase in a cheerful tone. Are you ready? Ready to go where? I asked on descending. To the theater. I am ready for the concert, I answered in as composed a voice as I could assume. I am not going to the concert tonight, Mrs. Smith. I thought you understood that, firmly replied my husband. I am going to see Fanny Ellsler, and if you go with me, I shall be very happy to have your company. If not, I must go alone. And I am going to the Philharmonic. I thought you understood that, I replied with equal resolution. Oh, very well, said he, not seeming at all disturbed. Then you can use the carriage at the door. I will walk to the theater. Saying this, Mr. Smith turned away from me deliberately and walked away. I heard him tell the driver of the carriage to take me to the Musical Fund Hall. Then I heard the street door close, and then I heard my husband's footsteps on the pavement as he left the house. Without hesitating a moment for reflection, I followed to the door entered the carriage, and ordered the man to drive me where? I had no ticket for the concert, nor could I go alone. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. To the musical fund hall, I believe, madam, he said, standing with his fingers touching the brim of his hat. I tried to think what I should do. To be conquered was hard, and it was clear that I could not go alone. No, I replied, grasping hold of the first suggestion that came to my mind. Drive me to number Walnut Street. They always leave out the number. I had directed him to the house of my sister, where I thought I would stay until after 11 o'clock and then return home, leaving my husband to infer that I had been to the concert. But long before I had reached my sister's house, I felt so miserable that I deemed it best to call out the window to the driver and direct him to return. On arriving at home some 20 minutes after I had left, I went up to my chamber and there had a hearty crying spell to myself. I don't know that I ever felt so bad before in my life. You must not have had many things to feel bad about. I had utterly failed in this vigorous contest with my husband, who had come off perfectly victorious. Many bitter things did I write against him in my heart, and largely did I magnify his faults. I believe I thought over everything that had occurred since we were married. It's only been about 11 days at this point, 11 days. And selected their, well, no, I guess not. It was 10 days when she was correcting him. This is probably a while later. Hopefully not on the 11th day of marriage. I thought over everything that had occurred since we were married and selected therefrom whatever could justify the conclusion that he was a self-willed, overbearing, unfeeling man and did not entertain for me a particle of affection. It was clear that I had not been able to manage my spouse, determined as I had been to correct all of his faults and make him one of the best, most conciliating and loving husbands with whom my wish would be law. Still, I could not think of giving up. The thought of being reduced to a tame, submissive wife who could hardly call her soul her own was not for a moment to be entertained. On reflection, it occurred to me that I had probably taken the wrong method with my husband. There was a touch of stubbornness in his nature that had arrayed itself against my too earnest efforts to bend him to my will. A better way occurred. I had heard it said by someone, or had read it somewhere, that no man was proof against a woman's tears. On the present occasion, I certainly felt much more like crying than laughing, and so it was no hard matter. I can honestly aver I appeared bathed in tears on my husband's return between 11 and 12 o'clock from the theater. I cried from vexation as much as from any other feeling. When Mr. Smith came up into the chamber where I lay, I greeted his presence with half a dozen running sobs, which he answered by whistling the Krakowian. That must be, I don't know what that is. The Krakowian. Krakovienne. It's got to be something that would be knowledgeable back then. I continued to sob, and he continued to whistle for the next 10 minutes. I would have slapped this man. By that time, he was ready to get into bed, which he did quite leisurely, and laid himself down upon his pillow with an expression of satisfaction. Still, I sobbed on, thinking that every sighing breath I drew was, in spite of his seeming indifference, a pang to his heart. No, I think it was not. But from this fond delusion, a heavy-drawn breath that was almost a snore aroused me. Excuse me. I raised up and looked over at the man. He was sound asleep. A good hearty cry to myself was all the satisfaction I had, and then I went to sleep. On the next morning, I met Mr. Smith at the breakfast table with red eyes and a sad countenance, but he did not seem to notice either. "I hope you enjoyed yourself at the concert last night," said he. "I was delighted at the theater. Fanny danced divinely. Hers is truly the poetry of motion." Now this was too much. I will leave it to any reader, any female reader, I mean, whether this was not too much. I burst into a flood of tears and immediately withdrew, leaving my husband to eat his breakfast alone. He sat his usual time, which provoked me exceedingly. If he had jumped up from the table and left the house, I should have felt that I had made some impression upon him. But to take things in this calm way, what had I gained? Nothing, as I could see. After breakfast, Mr. Smith came up to the chamber, and seeing my face buried in a pillow, weeping bitterly, I had increased the flow of tears on hearing him ascending the stairs, said in a low voice, "Are you not well, Mary?" I made no answer, but continued to weep. Mr. Smith stood for the space of about a minute, but asked no further question. Then, without uttering a word, he retired from the chamber, and in a little while after I heard him leave the house. I cried now in good earnest. It was plain that my husband had no feeling, that he did not care whether I was pleased or sad, but I determined to give him a fair trial. If I failed in this new way, what was I to do? The thought of becoming the passive slave of a domestic tyrant was dreadful. I felt that I could not live in such a state. When Mr. Smith came home at dinner time, I was in my chamber, ready prepared for a gush of tears. I do not like this advice. As he opened the door, I looked up with streaming eyes and then hid my face on a pillow. "Mary," said he, with such kindness in his voice, "what ails you? Are you sick?" He laid his hand upon mine as he spoke, but I did not reply. I meant to punish him well for what he had done, as a lesson for the future. I next expected him to draw his arm around me and be very tender and sympathizing in his words and tones. But no such thing. He quietly withdrew the hand he had placed upon mine and stood by me. I could feel, though not see, in a cold, erect attitude. "Are you not well, Mary?" he asked again. I was still silent. A little while after I heard him moving across the floor, and then the chamber door shut. I was once more alone. When the bell rang for dinner, I felt half sorry that I had commenced this new mode of managing my husband. But as I had begun, I was determined to go through with it. "He'll at least take care how he acts in the future," I said. I did not leave my chamber to join my husband at the dinner table. He sat at his usual time, and I could tell by the ringing of the bell for the servant to change the plates and bring in the dessert. I was exceedingly fretted, and more so by his returning to his business without calling up to see me and making another effort to dispel my grief. Must be nice. Must be nice to, be able to lay about and cry while the servants bring dinner. For 3 days, I tried this experiment upon my husband, who bore it with the unflinching heroism of a martyr. I'm really curious to know where this is going to end up because, again, this is written by a man, so something tells me that this is a cautionary tale to women. I'm really interested to see where this goes. So 3 days. He bore it with the unflinching heroism of a martyr. I was forced at last to come to, but I was by no means satisfied with my new mode was a failure. For all Mr. Smith's assumed indifference, I knew that he had been troubled at heart, and I was pretty well satisfied that he would think twice before provoking me to another essay of tears. Upon the whole, I felt pretty sure that I had discovered the means of doing with him as I pleased. A few weeks of sunshine passed. I must own that the sun did not look so bright nor feel so warm as it had done in former times, and then our wills came more into collision. But my tears fell upon a rock. I could not see that they made the least perceptible impression. Mr. Smith had his own way, and I cried about it until I got tired of that sport, and in very weariness gave over. For the space of a whole year, I stood upon tears as my last defensible position. Sometimes I didn't smile for weeks, but my husband maintained his ground like a hero. Well, clearly, Mary, this is not working. At last I gave up in despair. Pride, self-will, anger, all were conjured. I was a weak woman in the hands of a strong-minded man. If I could not love him as I wished to love him, I could at least obey. Oh, yeah, here it comes. I could at least obey. In nothing did I now oppose him, either by resolute words or tears. If he expressed a wish, whether to me agreeable or not, I acquiesced. One day, not long after this change in my conduct toward my husband, he said to me, I rather think, Mary, that we will spend a couple of weeks at Brandywine Springs instead of going to Cape May this season." I replied, "Very well, dear," although I had my heart set on going to the Capes. My sister and her husband and a number of my friends were going down, and I had anticipated a good deal of pleasure. I did not know of a single person who was going to the Brandywine Springs. But what was the use of entering into a contest with my husband? He would come off the conqueror, spite of angry words or ineffectual tears. "The Springs are so much more quiet than the Capes," said my husband. "Yes," I remarked. "There is less gay company there." "Don't you think you will enjoy yourself as well there as at the Capes?" Now, this was a good deal for my husband to say. I hardly knew what to make of it. "If you prefer going there, dear, let us go by all means," I answered. I was not affecting anything, but was in earnest in what I said. Mr. Smith looked at my face for some moments, and with usual affection, I thought. "Mary," said he, "if you think the time will pass more pleasantly to you at the Capes, let us go there by all means." "My sister Jane is going to the Capes," I remarked with some little hesitation, "and so is Mrs. L. and Mrs. D., and a good many more of our friends. I did think that I should enjoy myself there this season very much, but I have no doubt I shall find pleasant society at the Springs." "We will go to the Capes," said my husband promptly and cheerfully. "No," said I, emulous now for the first time on a new cause. "I am sure the time will pass agreeably enough at the Springs, and as you evidently prefer them there, we will let the Capes pass for this year." "To the Capes, Mary, and nowhere else," replied my husband in the very best of humors. "I am sure you will enjoy yourself far better there. I did not know your sister was going." And to the Capes we went, and I did enjoy myself exceedingly well. As for my husband, I never saw him in a better state of mind. To me, he was more like a lover than husband. No, I will not say that either, for I can't admit that a husband may not be as kind and affectionate as a lover, for he can and will be, if managed rightly, and a great deal more so. Whenever I expressed a wish, it appeared to give him pleasure to gratify it. Seeing this, instead of suffering myself to be the mere recipient of kind attentions, I began to vie with him in the sacrifice of selfish wishes and feelings. It is wonderful how all was changed after this. There were no more struggles on my part to manage my husband, and yet I generally had things go my own way. Before, I could not turn him to the right nor the left, though I strove to do so with my utmost strength. Now I held him only with a silken fetter and guided him, without really intending to do so, in almost any direction. Several years have passed since that ever-to-be-remembered happy visit to Cape May. Not once since have I attempted any management of my husband, and yet it is a rare thing that my wish is not, as it used to be before we were married, his law. It is wonderful, too, how he has improved. I am sure he is not the same man that he was 5 years ago, but perhaps I see with different eyes. At any rate, I am not the same woman, or, if the same, very unlike what I was then. So much for my efforts to manage a husband. Of the 3 ways so faithfully tried, my fair readers will be at no loss to determine which was the best. I make these honest confessions for the good of my sex. My husband, Mr. John Smith, will be no little surprised if this history should meet his eye, but I do not believe it will interrupt the present harmonious relations existing between us, but rather tend to confirm and strengthen them. Oh my goodness. So in this 1860 something, a man is writing a story to tell women that if you're going to manipulate your husband, this is the best way to do it. Don't ask for your own honest desires. He's going to say no. Don't cry and make him pity you, because he's not going to care. No, you must manipulate him and make him think that he came up with the answer. Not many things have changed, have they? I was really, really curious. Because I did not pre-read this. I'd only skimmed the beginning of it, and I really wondered, was this going to be like some kind of propaganda for men? It's a propaganda for being a terrible woman, actually. I mean, it would be nice if in relationships we could just ask for what we want and not play games with each other. But it seems like from 1860 to far into our future. Hey, Bisbee, how are you? Robin says he's not far off mark. Women are always making men think the idea was theirs to begin with. Yeah, I mean, well, unfortunately, sometimes that's what you have to do. But it's kind of sad that that is the way that our relationships are, and nothing has changed, right? Absolutely nothing. We're at, what, more than 150 years later. Very interesting stuff. All right. So let us switch over to Carrie Hall. And just to remind you, we have started reading From Hoopskirts to Nudity. And I'm hoping that anytime I mention the name of this book, that Twitch is not going to find it to be offensive, because it is not about anything lewd or, it just happens to be the title of a book written in 1938. And so she's really talking about, kind of, I guess, how ridiculous fashion is, it seems. This first chapter has been style versus fashion. And, she's basically said, style is kind of this quality. Fashion is the clothes you wear, but style is kind of how you determine, and not everybody has style. I think she said something like a regular woman and a woman with style, because, regular women would not have style, can wear the same dress, and, one of them's going to look frumpy and the other one's going to look stylish because she knows how to, she knows how to style it. We see this all the time still. How many Instagram accounts are there for styling? I know I actually follow a couple people because I'm very, very fascinated by, if they make their own clothes or they buy thrift store clothes and they just, all sorts of different body types, and they do this amazing, styling of their clothes. So, Bisbee, I'm glad you enjoy it. I always appreciate, I know you've got such a time difference, but I just so appreciate when you can make it. Any of my friends who are in the early morning or the late night and still choose to come hang out with us, I so appreciate you. And, my regulars too, you guys. Druid, my long-suffering dear Druid, you hardly miss a day, and I appreciate you so much for that. Okay, so let's get on with it. We're in the middle of chapter 1. As a reminder, we are reading From Hoopskirts to Nudity by Carrie A. Hall, written in 1938. And we are in chapter 1, Style versus Fashion. Today, the precept, know thyself, is the keynote to distinctive dress. To know yourself, your good points, as well as your shortcomings, has a direct bearing on what you may wear to best advantage. Study the lines of your figure, for they control the lines of your dress. The color must be selected with due consideration to your complexion and even your temperament. Your temperament? My dear, you are not a winter. You are a spring. In selecting the fabric, be sure to keep in mind where and when the dress is to be worn. Your dress should never be regarded as a mere covering. Rather, it should be a part of you, presenting to the world your most charming self. Having decided what your costume is to be, you should give the same careful consideration to the wearing of it, from the arrangement of your hair to the condition of your shoes. Thus, by care and thought, you will be able to select clothes that are practical and appropriate and yet becoming. All of this takes time and thought, but is it not worthwhile? Did not Benedict lie 10 nights awake carving the fashion of a new doublet? And is not the satisfaction of being well dressed in the eye of one's loved ones something to be desired? Okay. Frankly, my husband doesn't care that I pretty much live my entire life in t-shirts and jeans, but okay. Fashions come and fashions go, but human nature remains the same, time without end. By processes known only to the initiated, the human figure is altered to fit itself into the prevailing mode, and ears, whether fashionably hidden by various arrangements of hair or worn brazenly uncovered, Oh my goodness. I brazenly uncovered my ear. Are ever listening for the faintest whisper of the latest mode. On every occasion where women are gathered together for bridge, tea, or whatnot, you will hear what they are wearing, and that this, that, or the other thing is the very latest, and that my friend has just returned from Paris and all her skirts are 16 inches from the floor. 16 inches. Gasp. I mean, that. All her skirts are 16 inches from the floor, regardless of her height or the shape and size of her ankles. I'm thinking that cankles were not a thing in 1938, but Carrie Hall would certainly have mentioned them if they were. Girl, 16 inches is much too high for those cankles. You need to drop that to the floor. The word fashion seems to convey to many people an almost absolute sense of novelty. Yet there are distinctions. What is new today may be but a revival of what is old, a reminiscence of the past. Now, that's an interesting thing, in the 1930s. I think before I started studying some, fashion's not my thing. Like, I'm not necessarily looking at modern fashion so much as just from an interest of like, oh, wow, look at that. Or, when you get into like the more artistic types of stuff. But I'm not a person to study what designers are doing. But it was, definitely through a study of historic costume over long periods of my life that, there were times when, even in the 19th century, stuff came back, there were they never started wearing those doorway wide, you have to go through the doorway sideways panniers like they had, in the French court, Marie Antoinette type stuff. But, some pannier stuff came back, kind of as a throwback. And then you've got multiple bustle eras in the 19th century. One was more of just sort of a floofy fashionable bustle. And then you get that crazy one that literally you could set a tray right on the back of the bustle. But also coming from this modern mind, it often surprises me that people kind of had throwback fashion. I think about when I was a kid and, in the, in the 80s, late 80s, as a teenager, I was, raiding my mom's closet. Of course, my mother was fairly conservative, even as a youngster, so she didn't have any super fun hippie clothes. But, I was still going to the thrift store and raiding my mom's closet for things from, that could pass for the 60s because that was cool. And I also remember in the 90s when flared jeans and all that stuff were big. And my mom always laughed because she was like, oh my God, flared jeans were so big when you were little. And I had so many pairs of flared jeans and the fry boots and all that kind of stuff. And all that was popular in the in the 90s. And now I was seeing something, I think it was on Instagram, and it's referencing Kendrick Lamar, and it's flared jeans are making a comeback thanks to Kendrick Lamar. And I'm like, oh Lord, flared jeans have made a comeback so many times in my life, And when you really look at it, the 1970s were looking at the 1930s when, women were not necessarily wearing pants on the regular, but this kind of wide leg flared things they wore on the beach and they wore, and casually. And so everything is not new. Everything is always old. And it's just really interesting to hear somebody from 1938 talking about it, in the same way we would talk about it today. So I digress, but it's interesting. It's interesting to hear her say this. So, where did I leave off? What is new today may be a revival of what is old, a reminiscence of the past. The axiom, there is nothing new under the sun, applies with special force to fashion, and although fickle, fashion is also a thing of logic, a very feminine sort of logic to be sure, developing not, as might appear to the casual observer, at hazard, but with a certain definite consistency. Influenced, it must be admitted, by an increasingly insistent demand for the new and unusual. The causes of fashion are love of change, the influence of the environment, the interests of trade in the transient reign of objects and luxury, and the not always successful desire to improve the art of dress, to increase its charm, and to advance its progress. That's interesting. I mean, I've, again, I'm not a fashion person necessarily, but I mean, I think it's so interesting to hear, her say this. So quilters, so many people at QuiltCon had triangle panel in their jean side seam. I did that in the 70s and was regarded as quite a hippie. Yeah, and that was I think the tutorial I passed on Instagram where it said, Kendrick Lamar brought this back. And it was, the woman had crocheted like these little flowers, and then she'd stitched them all together in this like triangle shape and then inserted them. She'd just taken her jeans and, sliced the side and then made the triangle. It was really cute. And I mean, it wasn't like a super wide, it was just a narrow flare. But yeah, I saw tons of people doing the quilted triangle panel, and like, absolutely, I know people generation above me doing that in the 70s. I did similar things, when I was a kid. I didn't necessarily make flared jeans with the panel, but I did stuff like that. So it is funny, everything new is technically already been done before, I guess, in some way by somebody. The mode is the most ephemeral thing in an ever-changing world, here for a breath and gone, but at the present time there are innumerable guideposts on the road of fashion, and women are at no loss for description, history, practical details, or information on the latest whims of Dame Fashion. Now, I mean, we say this today with like, whatever, I mean, if you want to make flared jeans, you can just Google or look on YouTube or look on Instagram, like, how do you do this? Who's doing this? Like, we have it at the tip of our fingers to dress any way we want to. But she's really saying the same thing, in 1938. And what's really interesting to me, I mean, we're talking 1938. Now, the Great Depression, had been in full swing, and not everybody in the world, not everybody in the United States was in poverty, like standing in the breadline. But, it's almost like today. Certainly people, like, the economy's bad. People are paying attention to their pennies. But, we still look at things like fashion. I mean, you're maybe right now, if you're like in my situation, like I'm not going out and buying any like major fashion purchases. Maybe one day I could have something like, the perfect little black Prada dress or something. That stuff doesn't matter to me, but I'm not going to go buy it today because, I don't have those disposable income, but I can still splurge on something. And I think, my mom has always said during economic tough times, people do turn to they turn to making things with their own hands, but they also turn to small splurges. So I know across the 20th century, I mean, studies have shown that when the economy dips, purchases of small things, small fashion items, like lipstick, nail polish, small jewelry, costume jewelry, small things, increase. And you do. That's when you kind of see these micro fashion trends, because people, they don't swear off spending money altogether. They still want to reward them. I mean, it's this capitalist idea of like, you still want to reward yourself a little bit, for, having managed the gas crisis, or, living through the housing bubble bursting, that kind of thing. So it's interesting that this Carrie Hall's coming from the 30s to tell us this, and it's not really all that different than how we look at fashion today, I think. I mean, I'm not a fashion person. I think a person deeply ingrained in fashion might have something different to say, but yes, Quiltish, I agree. Bustles would be a pain. Although I have to tell you, having been a historical costumer and having done that, the historical costuming and cosplay community, I was part of that for a long time. There are the lighter bustle, the one that's really just a bum pad and not the cage bustle. So like the cage bustles are the things that either they had to collapse, like they would have to collapse up into your back for you to sit down, or you couldn't sit. But those big bum pads are actually kind of nice because like it's like sitting on an extra cushion. I have one that's stuffed with feathers. I got a feather pillow and stuffed the bum pad with feathers from the feather pillow. And it is actually quite a comfy thing. So the bum rolls and the bum pads I have no problem with. And what's funny is if you ever watch any like drag queen stuff like RuPaul's Drag Race, the drag queens will do those like crazy antics and they'll jump and they'll fall and they'll, do the splits and stuff. And I always like cringe when I see them like come down hard on their butt. They do that death drop thing. But many of them are wearing such major padding around their hips and their rear end that they fall on that and it's pretty comfortable. They're not hurting themselves so much. So yeah, I'm glad bustles aren't fashion, but I also, you really can't knock padding when it comes in handy. All right. Where did I leave off here? So the causes of fashion. The mode is the most ephemeral thing in an ever-changing world, here for a breath and gone. But at the present time, there are innumerable guideposts on the road to fashion, and women are at no loss for description, history, practical details, or information. Intelligent minds are daily at work trying to impart grace to the mode of the hour with an air of chic and youth, and to invent or perfect the numberless trifles that are either aids or snares to beauty. No one period, no one influence, no one motif is studied, but the most authentic, the most sophisticated, the most alluring of all that the ages have to offer is spread before the artist that he may give to womankind the most fashion-appealing designs for their consideration. With unerring talent, the costume designer of today must interpret nature at her best. Supermodern translations in a swirl of line and color, so symbolic of the woman of today with her strenuous, up-and-doing, ever-on-the-go personality. And that's cute. Fashion may be superb, but it is also absurd and cruel. It is cruel and heartless as well as unreasoning and irresponsible. For instance, fashion says a certain fur shall be the mode, and an unoffending animal suffers extinction. Oh, yeah. Or it says skirts shall be tight to the point of absolute danger, and whole commodities in the cloth weaving industry go hungry for lack of work. You must have full skirts, or the fabric people will die. Fashions, as they are decreed, are often without justification, and yet whim in costume, a desire for novelty in dress, are the great forces that have kept art, craftsmanship, and beauty alive through the trying years of modern history. Thus, fashion is paradoxical to a superlative degree. Through the taste of the professional designer, with experiment, modification, and observation, the costume of the woman of today has been brought into nearly perfect relationship with her physical, mental, and social functions. The fashions of bygone days never cease to interest women of all ages, and glimpses of the yesterdays cause us to wonder and speculate on the habits of people who would wear such strange and grotesque clothes. It is decidedly interesting to study the silhouette of women's dress as it has changed through the centuries. As we look at the old-fashioned prints, with edges discolored by the passage of years, the whole colorful panorama unrolls before us. The creators of the modes of any day may be held innocent of many of the crimes committed in the name of fashion by her blind followers. So do not blame Pierre Cardin. You need to blame yourself for wearing that crap. With no knowledge of the principles of design and color that are so necessary if one would choose wisely,
The herd-minded sheep of the world fit themselves out with the latest fashions, regardless of their suitability as to age, size, or height, and believe themselves transformed. With that effect, we have daily opportunities of observation. Oh my gosh. This is hilarious. I mean, how often do you hear people gossiping about an older woman saying, like, she is trying to dress way too young? Or a person, you look at a person and you're like, oh, honey, no, your butt is way too big for that. I mean, we do that today without even thinking twice. There are fashions for the bantam and white lightweights, for the middle and heavyweights, and streamlined ones for the teenage. But unless each recognizes her own type and selects her clothes accordingly, there is little that can be done about this very serious state of affairs. Well, unfortunately, for the middleweights and the heavyweights, the clothing has not always been good. Appropriateness in dress is a thing no woman can afford to neglect. Charles Worth, he's a very important fashion designer. Charles Worth, the founder of the famous Maison Worth of Paris, used the word suitability as his watchword. The costume must be suitable to the occasion in fabric, line, and color, and to the wearer's particular type and social position. If one may not educate the general public to see the desirability of selecting its clothes from the standpoint of becomingness and adaptability, may not one hope for the continuing of schools for salespeople, in which they may be taught to know the difference between style and grotesqueness, and to make a protest against clothing the ordinary person in extraordinary garments? Or that they might be taught what not to show certain customers? Why clothe a quiet, dignified, gray-haired gentlewoman in indecent, vulgar designs, which are only suitable for the racetrack follower type of female? Is that basically saying, don't dress your grandmother like a trashy racetrack floozy? When shopping for a new wardrobe, or even for only one dress, the woman of discrimination dislikes being told by the saleswoman, "But this is what they're wearing, madam." She feels like saying, who, if I may ask, are they? And what difference does it make to me what they are wearing? Not everyone looks well in the same type of dress. Yet, year after year, the fat and the thin, the old and the young wear the same huge sleeves, the same wide collars, or whatever special atrocity fashion may be offering at that particular moment, all because of that mysterious aggregation called they. It is no uncommon occurrence to see women of different ages, with different types of faces and coiffure, being fitted with the same hat by a saleswoman who assures each in turn that it looks stunning on you, madam. There is a difference between fashion and folly. Fashion, as it relates to dress, is the result of some designer's inspirational idea, which, being developed along certain lines with concordant colors and adjuncts, becomes a fashion. The fanciful manifestation of the original idea is not suited to every face and figure, but being adapted to the particular requirements of the prospective wearer, it may become a smart fashion. On the other hand, if it is accepted without regard to its specific details and worn indiscriminately by any and every type of figure, regardless of line and composition, it is a folly. There seems to be, among American women, a tendency to flaunt their bad taste as if they were proud of it. Or if not exactly proud, at least calmly satisfied. Well, thanks, Carrie Hall. I mean, you are an American woman yourself. The one thing, then, that seems most necessary of emphasis is the fact that to be inappropriately dressed is to be badly dressed, no matter how beautiful the material or design of the garment may be. In the old days, the mode was of importance to limited groups of aristocrats, and the masses of common people had no part in the fashions. Today, fashions are a factor in the lives of women of every rank, from the highest to the lowest in the entire world, but perhaps in a lesser degree to the women of the Orient. Is it too much to ask that American women, young and old, dress for the part they are to play on the stage of life? Well, maybe maybe we can sometimes have it both ways, Carrie, maybe. The town girl and the country girl, how vastly different their clothes should be. Just as different as their personalities are bound to be when their environment and interests are so diverse. To have a desire for clothes out of the ordinary and yet live a life where there is no occasion to wear such clothes is indeed a tragedy. But it is a situation in which many find themselves, and there is no real reason why the poor little rich girl and Cinderella should not be dressed in accordance with their station in life. Oh, but that is so sad. I mean, just because you live in the country doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to be as princess sometimes. I mean, when a girl to whom a new dress is an epic, an event to be approached with fear and hesitancy, believes that good, simple clothes belong to another world, it is usually because the elementary knowledge of what looks well and can be worn is incomprehensible to her. It is unfortunate that many young girls take their ideas from the wrong source. Public fashion shows and moving pictures are extreme and theatrical in order to attract attention, but they are not criteria of good taste for the guidance of the young, nor the old. Dress for the young girl should be simple, yet gay and colorful. For the businesswoman, neat and smart. For the matron, dignified and charming. And for the older woman, easy and graceful. Each new vogue in women's fashions brings forth its own particular type of critic. The criticism that the wasp-waist corset was unhygienic was justified, and now that the pendulum has swung to the far extreme and women are corsetless or wearing a soft, form-fitting foundation garment that gives freedom to a vigorous, lithe body, the critics are saying that they are immoral. And I mean, again, all the old things are new again. I mean, how many years in the 20th century have women, taken on diets, surgeries, and garments that give them the wasp waist? In each new departure, there are extremes, false starts, and absurdities that need some measure of regulation. However, such is the perversity of human nature that criticism often arouses opposition that actually prolongs the life of absurd fashions that would otherwise disappear through the exercise of normal good taste. I'm trying to think, cold shoulder shirts. And no offense to anybody out there that has those. I just have always hated them. And it's like, will they not go away? I feel like you can still buy them now. They were, I don't even remember what years. Was it the 2010s, the late 2010s, those were popular? That's just a minor one. But low-rise jeans. I think we can all agree that unless you are 13 years old or 16, low-rise jeans are not for any of us. Okay. In judging a woman's character by her clothes, and which I think is wrong, it is said that a slovenly dressed woman will be slovenly in her mental habits. Okay. All right. I am just wearing yet a t-shirt today and some sweatpants, and yes, in fact, I believe my mental habits are quite slovenly today. That the woman addicted to extreme fashions is sure to be an extremist in other things. But it does not necessarily follow that a woman who wears immoral clothes is immoral. Well, thank you, Carrie. Thank you for saying that. I shouldn't have thanked her so fast. But rather that she is thoughtless and given to recklessly and relentlessly following the prevailing mode without knowing why. Oh, goodness. Oh, see, Robin says, 2 co-workers about 10 years ago, both in their 70s, still wore full pantyhose and girdles under their polyester pants. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Wow. That sounds awful, but I mean, my grandmother was wearing her polyester pantsuits until nearly the end, so I guess if they're comfortable. I can't imagine that wearing full pantyhose under anything is terrible. To wear it under so you put your pantyhose on over your girdle, right? Right? And then, yeah, all that. Polyester pants, period, are terrible. Like, just the sweat. I don't even want to think about it. The woman of today is dressed more according to the contour of her body, her social and physical needs, than at any other time in the history of fashion. And in this, there should be no implication of immorality. Okay. I mean, in 1938, like, what is considered an immoral clothing? I mean, today, immoral clothing is anything that, like, shows too much. And there's a wide range of what modern people think is too much. I mean, I don't think there's a such thing as immoral clothing. It's, it's what is immoral is in the eyes of the beholder, I think, right? This is not an unusual situation, for women's dress at various periods in its evolution have been subjected to similar criticism. Every age and every new movement in thought and costume has been attended with obvious restrictions and obvious unfortunate results. Clothes or their absence, fashion or its absence, has no bearing on morality or modesty. Costumes which have been more humanized than sentimentalized are not an indication of depravity, but rather an expression of rational good taste. Good sense in fashion means simplicity in dress and careful relationship between the functions of the individual and the costume itself. The woman dressed nearest to the ideals of the functions she proposes to perform is the best dressed woman. Since nearly every woman has a little queerness in her own conception of what her wearing apparel should be like, which she naturally thinks is originality, it's not easy for any two to have the same estimate. It is not easy for any two to have the same estimate of good taste in dress. Oh, yeah. Druid says they aren't comfortable with pantyhose, girdle, all topped off with slacks, bra, camisole, blouse, plus jewelry. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think about, like, me flouncing around my house looking all, like, homeless. And then I'm on the internet where, granted, there's only 11 people looking at me at the moment, but goodness, any number of people could look at me after I put this online, once it's finished and it's out there. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's easy to judge people. And I personally think, I mean, like I said, there is no immoral fashion. There is still surprising fashion, I think. That sometimes I see people wearing things and I'm like, why? Does that make you feel pretty? Does it make you feel comfortable? Does it make you feel fashionable? That's really generally the only thing on my mind when I see something that, like, why are you wearing a bikini into, like, the DMV? It's not an old gas, but it's like, why? What made you make that decision? It's interesting. But you know what? Like what you're saying, Druid, as far as, like, physically comfortable, absolutely not. I mean, we know anybody who's ever worn polyester pants and or a pantyhose. And I realize girdles are not so much a thing anymore, but Spanx are. Spanx are really no different, in my opinion. There's psychology behind the confinement. Yeah, there is. And I also think, like, I mean, not to get too, like, out there with this, but I mean, when they were handing out boobs, I somehow got in the second helpings line. And if I would never, ever go out in public without a bra on, just because I'm like, and it makes me feel uncomfortable physically and just my vision of myself. So even though everybody knows bras are awful, I still, like, it's a comfort thing for me, like, having the girls restrained. So yes, there absolutely is a psychology behind, like, the way our clothes feel. And I gotta be honest, like, I have a couple pairs of Spanx. I have some that they're so hard to get on because they're so elastic and stiff. They might as well be torture devices. They are. But if I'm wearing that under a dress, like at a wedding, or some kind of formal occasion, I feel a sense of relief because I know that if I forget and I slouch a little, I'm not like sucking it in and walking around like this and I slouch a little, thank goodness for those like concrete cement Spanx. Like nothing's gonna pop out in a terrible way. And even though it's uncomfortable, there is that like safety, I think. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of psychology, I think, that we can look at behind clothing that, goes much farther than like any of the observations that, a person like Carrie Hall would make. And I mean, not disparaging what she has to say, but yeah, I think that there's so much to be said for why do we choose to wear the things, why do we make the decisions we make? I'm certainly like, I think about my husband. He is all about comfort. He has no problem with the fact that our neighbors might see him go out and get the mail or take the trash out wearing a flannel robe and knee socks and Birkenstocks. Like, it does not bother him in the least. And I care less about that now than I used to. My son, I remember when he would get on the bus, there was a time period where I'm trying to think, I think I was consulting. So I was home in the morning to be able to get him on the bus. I didn't have to go anywhere till later. And so a lot of times I would go out there like in a sweatshirt and like pajama pants. And, like the cute pajama pants that people will wear to the grocery store, like little flannel things, nothing obscene, nothing that's, like silky negligee like stuff. But at 8 and 9 years old, he was so horrified by me standing at the bus stop in a sweatshirt and pants that one might, think of as being worn to sleep. That, to me, it was just being comfortable and not having to get dressed any earlier in the day. And to him, it was just an absolute like embarrassment. So there is a lot of psychology around what we wear. You guys got me thinking. Okay. Everywhere one goes, there is some comment on women's clothes more or less facetious. Indeed, same today. Everybody feels privileged to introduce the subject at any place, no matter whether it is a wedding or a political meeting or a revival, and quite assuredly, if it is a tea or other such social function, specially dedicated to dress. The subject makes conversation quite as conveniently as does the weather, and serves much better for those of facetious turn of mind. There are very few women who have a rag to their backs that have not been torn to shreds by the tongues of their friends and enemies. I guess that's a turn of phrase. Women's clothes cannot be immune from comment as long as they form an important part of the social scheme of living. The question which arouses in women the quality generally supposed to be the exclusive possession of her sex is whether man observes the details of her dress or only the general effect thereof. Now that's an interesting question. Poets, artists, and many others who may lay legitimate claim to the artistic temperament have always realized the charm that lies in and gives expression to their ideal type of women's dress. The great Ben Jonson expressed his idea of fair women's dress as follows. Give me a look, give me a face that makes simplicity a grace. Robes loose flowing hair is free, such sweet neglect more taketh me. Than all the adulteries of art, they strike mine eyes, but not my heart. One of the most charming, sensible, and ever-pleasing of verses has been written on the subject of women's dress is consisting of the following 4 lines. I love a pretty face, I love a dainty waist, and I truly love smiles that are sweet, with due adoration for the ankle that is neat. In 1788, Thomas Jefferson wrote a very pertinent letter to his daughter, who was then only 11 years of age. He said, a lady who has been seen as a sloven in the morning will never efface the impression she has made, with all the dress and pageantry she can afterward involve herself in. I hope, therefore, the moment you rise from your bed, your first work will be to dress yourself in such a style as that you may be seen by any gentleman without his being able to discover a pin amiss or any other circumstances of neatness wanting. Screw you, Thomas Jefferson. Let the little girl go get her Lucky Charms without having to put on an uncomfortable dress. Come on. Thomas Carlyle said, all nature and life are but one garment, a living garment woven and ever a-weaving in the loom of time. Is not here, indeed, the outline of a whole clothes philosophy? Oh, see, I like Thomas Carlyle's words much better. Ever a-weaving in the loom of time. So Robin says, when I'm at home, it's comfy pants and tees. If I'm going to the store, I'll make sure I'm a lot better put together. A nicer pair of pants, a nicer shirt, a little makeup and earrings. Because if I don't, I will most certainly run into people I haven't seen in ages. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Since the pandemic, I have gotten a little, I don't care as much. I still will put on pants. This t-shirt I have to run out after this. I have to run to the post office. This t-shirt will definitely be seen by the post office. But yeah, I would put pants on. But yeah. That was your sister-in-law. Her ex never saw her without makeup. She always got up at least an hour. That's crazy. That is just crazy. And I've seen that. I'm trying to think. There was a movie where, or was it on Mad Men? I want to say that one of the wives on Mad Men did that. I don't even think she set an alarm. She somehow got herself up an hour earlier and redid her whole hair and makeup and everything, and then lay back down and was like, I just woke up like this. And I'm not going to sit there and say bad things about people that do that. If that's what makes you comfortable, if that's what makes you happy. But it makes me angry that a husband should expect that, maybe when you're dating somebody, you're spending the night for the first time. You're like, oh God, they can't see what I look like when I wake up. I get it. I understand. We all have some, little bit of self-esteem issues, but I don't know. I mean, I've gotten to this point in my life where it's kind of take me as I am. This is it. This is what you got. That said, my grandmother would be very upset with me if I didn't have, I didn't at least put respectable pants on and not shuffle around in my bedroom slippers. But yeah, I feel like I've been hearing that forever though. Can you imagine the things that people will go to the store wearing? And it's I guess as casual, becomes more of an aspect of our life. And especially, I really think the pandemic really broke down some things for people. But like I said, in the past, I kind of would smirk at people that would go out literally in their pajamas and run to the grocery store. But I'm kind of well, if I don't have to get out of the car, does it really matter? If I'm just going to the drive-thru or I'm just picking up stuff, the husband is the one to be able. Yes, exactly. I don't know if I ever told you guys the story of how my husband and I, how we first started dating. We were not really even officially dating per se. It was one of those foregone conclusions. I think it was clear to each other that we felt the same about each other, but we hadn't really made that we are dating commitment. And it was in, I want to say it was January. Late January, maybe mid to late January of 1993 or 94. I think it might have been January of 94. And he came to visit to hang out one night, and they were calling for bad weather, but it turned out to be worse than expected. And it was one of those things, we'd been drinking. I said, I don't want you driving. He lived far enough away that he had to get on a highway. It was, I wasn't being coy. I was literally being like, I like this guy. I don't want him to get in an accident and die home on the way home. So like, just stay. You could sleep on my couch. Well, the weather got worse and worse and worse, and it ended up being like a 3-day thing. And we leaned into it. But because I was in college and I lived alone at the time and I had literally no food, we walked to 7-Eleven, which was right by my house. And I don't know what I was thinking. The guy that was there running the 7-Eleven had been there for 3 days straight because he couldn't leave. So I'm guessing that the nacho cheese had been in the thing for 3 days. And I got nachos. And within about an hour, back home, I had food poisoning. And it was shooting out both ends. And all I could think was, I need him to leave because he can't see this. But I am so absolutely ill that I can't, like, I don't even know what to do. And it came to the point where he was like, look, I will give you your privacy, but do you need something? Like, can I hold your hair? Can I like get you some water? Like, you know? And I finally decided, I was like, okay, he's not going to leave. He can't leave. I'm either going to have to like marry this man or kill him. And by the time I felt well and he was still there and he was still, you know, like cared about me and wasn't like, ew, gross, but was like, do you feel okay? I don't want to leave you alone if you're still sick. Like, this man actually cared about me. I was like, okay, he has seen me at my absolute worst. And now 29 years later, he's seen much worse. But, yeah, I don't think a whole lot can rank right up there with like, you know, you're not even dating this woman and you've stayed with her for 3 days and now she's like barfing and pooping and like has no control. So yeah, your husband is the one person that you should be able to just drop the mask and, you know, go to 7-Eleven in your pajamas and then get food poisoning. Like that's the good one. Now, nowadays, if I went during a snowstorm to 7-Eleven and got bad nacho cheese, he would be like, you brought this on yourself. The Gatorade's in the refrigerator. And therein lies, you know, the trouble with this story here. How to manage a husband. Because when you're dating, like when she says they're a lover, oh, aren't they so concerned about you? They're so loving. But after you've been married to them for a while, they just don't care anymore. That's not true, really, but there is something to be said for those old, like, you know, what the salesman sold you and what you actually go home with, right? So it is about 3:39 my time. You guys, I think I'm not going to start this next chapter. I don't like stopping in the middle of chapters. I like to sort of read the chapters, you know, in one sitting. So I think, and my voice is doing the scratchy thing again. Unfortunately, despite the fact my father is in very bad health. My stepmother chain smokes. My father smoked until pretty recently. So I'm still dealing with, you know, my seasonal whatever was going on. And then spending a week at their house. I'm like secondhand smoker for sure. So anyway, I need to... the honey and the whatever. I need to start that all over again. So yeah, I think that we can pick up with Hoopskirts and Petticoats, 1866 to 1876 is chapter 2. So this will be interesting. And I see in the very first page she's talking about dolls. This is an interesting thing. Carrie Hall collected and made dolls. And I'm going to have to look for it. I may have shown it before when we looked at Carrie Hall's first book with Rose Cressinger. But she was interested in fashion, you know, so all of the quilt stuff, but she also had all this doll and fashion stuff. So, you know, when I think about reading these texts, I'm not going so far outside of quilts and textiles because the same people were interested in these, like, you know, I mean, sometimes they butt up against each other and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're a little bit far apart, but it's all still textiles, right?
So, yeah, that is a good point, Druid. It's not much of a home when you have to deny illness, barrenness, and all your own nature. Yeah, you should be able to be, it's a healthy relationship. And not even marriage. It's a healthy relationship to kind of have, there's some things you just keep to yourself. The things that are embarrassing are bad nature or whatever, whatever we think of ourselves. Sometimes those things are best to keep. We all have to have our, and I don't want to say secrets. Secrets always sound so bad. There's the things that we just keep private, that maybe we never share with anyone. But I think that in a good relationship, whether it's a significant other or trusted friend or family member, a person who is going to be trusted enough to know the full you, absolutely. It is, I think, an important thing that you don't have to pretend to be well, that you don't have to hide your flaws or what you perceive to be your flaws. I think a lot of people perceive flaws that are not really flaws, but, I think that is important. And it makes me sad when I have had friends and even family members that, just are not comfortable with their significant others or, whoever they choose to be close to them. And that they have this sort of, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like this outer shell that they show, and they never show their true self. And I think that's very sad indeed, because I think, it's not healthy to have, everything hanging out all the time. I think we have to, we have to shelter ourselves, put on masks, whatever, code shifting, that kind of thing. We have to do that to preserve ourselves at times, out there in the world, at work or in social situations. But I think it's also important that we have a place and a person or people that we can just be our true selves with. And you tend to lose yourself if you don't have that, I think. So I always feel very bad for people that either don't understand that or simply just don't have it. They might understand that and they simply don't have it at their disposal or within their reach. And I think it's something that is important. So, yeah. I try to be that friend to people. I have some friends, and I have a very good friend from high school. Like, girl, I need to know less. So, but yeah, I'm going to wrap up here, and I will see you on Thursday. And yeah, I'm going to try to do the Marcel Duchamp stuff on Thursday. So, if you're offended by things, I'm warning you now. I think this group is going to be a great group to talk about Marcel Duchamp with. But yeah, so I will see you Thursday. Hopefully you can join me and Jill tomorrow on quilt learning. If not, keep your eyes peeled on social media for the announcement about Pam Week's paid lecture that we're going to host. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I hope this is a good Monday for you. Yeah. And we're going to have amazing weather here. So I hope those of you that are east of the Mississippi, I think you're having the same weather I am. But Robin, I think you're probably going to be getting some colder than normal weather. I'm really sorry. Those of you in California and whatnot, I'm so sorry. I think you're going to get hit. But there's a big weather swap going on, I think. But anyway, I will be happy to have a little bit of sunshine. So anyway, have a super week, and I will see you soon. Mwah, mwah, mwah.